So one of the big stories that we're unpacking today, the rules and regulations for the adjusted level 4 lockdown have now been gazetted by the Co-operative Governance Minister, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma. The regulations cover most of what President Cyril Ramaphosa's address mentioned, with a few noteworthy changes. These include new laws prohibiting the incitement of anyone to defy lockdown regulations, like a curb on public gatherings. Anyone found to be encouraging others to disregard lockdown rules can face up to 6 months in jail or a fine. Municipalities are now required by law to inform residents about the spread of COVID-19 at a local level as well. But let's give you a further breakdown of these regulations and whether or not there is any recourse available to citizens. For more, we're joined by legal expert Ulrich Roux. Ulrich, it's great to talk to you this morning, albeit on a rather depressing topic for so many South Africans. We'll get to the various sectors in just a moment. But explain to those of us who are not in the legal fraternity, what does it mean now that government has gazetted these regulations?
Hi, good morning, Michelle. Yes, so the President announced the new regulations and that the country is moved back into level 4 lockdown on Sunday evening. But in terms of our law, it is only regarded as law, so it can only be enforceable by our enforcement agencies such as the National Prosecuting Authority and the South African Police Services once it is gazetted. And that means that it has been published in the Government Gazette. It is on paper and it is there for everyone to see. So it is now regarded as law.
So this is quite an interesting one. Anyone found to be encouraging others to disregard lockdown rules. I mean, in your experience, Ulrich, we saw the first phase of the lockdown and then under the second wave of infections. This is really the most stringent lockdown measures we're seeing since the start of the pandemic, when we were on level 5 of the lockdown. But there's not as much buy-in from citizens this time around.
Yes, certainly. And I think that this new regulation, it is very unique. I agree with you. And it is in line with what the President said on Sunday evening as well. People must think very carefully before they push the send button, before they push the share button on their phones. People have been restricted now to their homes and their workplaces. People's movement have been restricted. So that means that people are spending a lot more time on their cellular phones, on social media, on news pages. And, the spreading of fake news and fake regulations and inciting people not to adhere to the regulations has definitely become a big problem. And the President addressed it on Sunday evening. And I think that is exactly what these new regulations aim to address. And that is that if you incite people, to not adhere to the regulations, for instance, one of the regulations being that there are no public gatherings allowed in public spaces. So, for instance, in parks or on beaches, municipal gardens, and there's a group who incites people to gather and to come together in one of these parks, then that is definitely seen as a criminal offence. I think the problem that government is having, and you could see it clearly with the President's address on Sunday evening, is that initially when the whole world came to know about this pandemic and South Africa went into a state of lockdown, there was buy-in from the South African community, as you correctly pointed out. That is almost a year and a half ago already now. People understandably have become frustrated, but we cannot lose that buy-in from the community and from society, because now is really the crucial time that we need to adhere to these regulations.
Yeah.
For all indications are that this third wave is going to be the worst by far that the country is going to experience, and that would be the main reason for this additional regulation in the Disaster Management Act. That if you incite people and you try and convince people to break the laws and to not adhere to the regulations, then you could be held liable, and you could face imprisonment of up to 6 years, which is a very serious sentence.
You said up to 6 years?
6 months, apologies.
6 months.
6 months,
right.
yes.
Which is still quite
serious.
serious.
No, any 1 day in prison is enough.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a really hard lockdown. It's not level 5, but it is still an incredibly hard lockdown. And you talk about these arrestable offences, including this new law, this new incitement law. How do we balance that out? Because there are so many sectors that are up in arms, not because this is a mild irritation. There is that segment of the community as well who are just annoyed at the new regulations. But for others, it's about livelihoods, the ability to actually put food on the table for their families, restaurants. The liquor industry has also come to the fore, the tourism industry in many respects, and the list goes on and on. So how do I voice my satisfaction with government, say, let's gather up a group of restaurant owners to protest the new regulations and balance that with the new restrictions?
Yes, I think, people must have regard to the state that the entire world is in. It is a definite fact that this new Delta variant has taken, the world and has taken over, and we're seeing many more cases of this Delta variant all across the world. South Africans we must be reasonable and we must be logical. I can guarantee you that despite the dissatisfaction of how government has handled this lockdown and the rollout of of the vaccine, et cetera, the fact is that South Africa is facing a serious wave of infections at the moment. The only way that we can try and counter that is to limit human interaction and human contact, and that is how we can try and flatten the curve, so to speak. So, of course, the hospitality industries, the restaurants, gyms. On Sunday evening, I received in excess of 100 messages from people asking me if they can go to gym tomorrow morning. And, of course, being healthy and going to gym is important, but surely not being incubated and being in a hospital and in ICU is more important than that. And people must just approach this logically. Yes, it is of course tough. It is tough on everyone. It is 2 weeks of hard lockdown, for lack of a better word. But let's try and adhere to these regulations for these 2 weeks and then see where we are at the end of it. If people adhere to the regulations, I have no doubt that it will assist in flattening the curve, and then we take it further from there. If sectors want to petition the government, then there are obviously channels to do that. You speak to firstly municipal managers, then provincial leaders, then go up to government, then to ministers. Those channels must be followed. But the fact of the matter is that we need to adhere to these regulations and see if we can flatten the curve in the next 2 weeks. Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, the liquor industry already preparing papers to take government up on this issue, to take government to court on this issue. Ulrich, in terms of what you understand about the situation in Gauteng, we say we're on level 4 around the country. It does feel in many respects that Gauteng is on level 5. You're not allowed to travel in or out of the province unless under specific circumstances. What are those circumstances? And if I do need to travel for work and an emergency, how do I go about doing that?
So interprovincial travel is allowed. People are allowed to travel between provinces throughout the entire country, except Gauteng. You may not travel in and out of Gauteng for purposes of leisure. So what that means is that only if you are required to be in Gauteng for work purposes, you would then have to complete a form or an application which is attached to the end of the updated regulations, so that if you are stopped by a law enforcement official, you can indicate to them, well, I need to be in Gauteng for this purpose. It is either a very important meeting that I need to attend to, a site inspection, a workshop, etc., etc. And if you can indicate that it is purely for work purposes, then you are acting in accordance with the regulations. If you are found to be traveling in and out of Gauteng and it is not for work purposes, then you are liable to a fine or imprisonment of 6 months as well.
Ulrich Roux, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for coming on to the show, giving us some clarity around these lockdown restrictions. Ulrich Roux is a legal expert as we continue to unpack just what it all means for you under level 5 of the lockdown and this new incitement law as well, liable for a fine or up to 6 months imprisonment.